My old sword. Sting. Here, take it.
I just need to use the bathroom real quick.
You want me to pause the movie?
No, it's cool. You can continue watching. I've seen this before. Hello. Today we're making a sculpture based on one of the scariest jump scare scenes in movie history. I'm of course talking about the scene in The Fellowship of the Ring where Bilbo's unhealthy obsession with ancient jewelry makes one heck of an appearance. Friends of this channel might know that I'm a fan of the animated Lord of the Rings from 1978, and I was actually thinking about recreating the scene from that movie instead. But then I remembered that not only isn't Bilbo's face that scary, it's more like conveying the expression of being eager to put the ring on something else, but his finger. If you know what I'm saying. As you might have already figured out, I decided that it would be a good idea to start sculpting the head first. Not only would it probably be the most tricky part to get right, but on this sculpture in particular, I can safely say that it's the most important part of this piece. I'm not saying that the other parts of Bilbo isn't scary, but if a hobbit-sized person would try to intimidate me, you'd better have a scary face. Or a gun or something. Then the head was done, and it was time to make an armature. Wingardium Leviosa, or whatever Gandalf said. When the aluminum foil had been added to the armature, then it was time to apply the first layer of clay to the body. It's perhaps one of the more satisfying parts of the process, where you don't have to think too much. You just add a bit of clay here and there and you poke, rub, squish and roll it, until it's looking somewhat smooth, I guess. The legs were looking a bit too thick, so I grabbed the first hobby knife within reach and I started to cut away the excess clay. And after that it was time to have a look at the feet. Okay, one of the most important things about hobbit feet is of course the fact that they're really hairy, and Bilbo's walkers is no exception to that. So I gave both the feet a patch of hair that kind of look a bit like a toupee. I sculpted the pants to look like they were rolled up on the leg, because I was sure that Bilbo had rolled up pants in this scene. I mean, I've seen it 1,000 times. But apparently I've never looked at his pants, because he don't. Oh well, be that as it may. One thing is for certain. Bilbo's pants still have folds. And if your pants don't have folds, then they're too tight, just saying. I took an old piece of fabric and I dabbed it all over the pants. That way the pants would get a fabric-looking texture. It's a bit hard to see right now, but it makes a big difference when you start to paint it. And the same thing went for the arms as well. Using a piece of fabric also helps to smooth out any hard lines that a sculpting tool might leave behind. With a small amount of clay and a large amount of determination, I made a pair of clay hands, and when those were attached to the arms, then I used a small piece of clay to cover up the gap between the hand and the wrist. I attached some thin strips of clay around the shoulders as well as the waist, before blending one side in with the rest of the body to create the border for Bilbo's fashionable vest. And when that was done, then a small breast pocket were added before the head was put into place. I have no idea what this is called in English, but in Sweden we call it kavajslag. And when the kavajslag was done, then I realized that I had to remove the head again so I could attach a small piece of ragtaggedy fabric that would be flopping around under Bilbo's face. The final thing to sculpt was some hair, but in the heat of the moment I decided to give him a bath towel on the head instead. Just kidding. When the bath towel had been appropriately flattened to look like a swim cap, then I took my flattest sculpting tool and I started to poke a whole bunch of lines on the head. It can be quite tricky to make hair look natural, but one thing that helps is to make sure that the hair is separated into smaller sections and not just looking like a big blob. Then the sculpting was done and it was time for Bilbo to head into the oven for 30 minutes. And as I was waiting on that, then it was time to make a base. I wanted to make the base as simple as possible, pretty much just cutting out a square of XPS foam and giving it some rough texture to make it look like the stone floor that Bilbo is standing on in the movie. So that's what I did, and this is how it looks. Well, then everything was built, and it was time to paint. Instead of painting every separate part of my model from start to finish, I usually start out by just painting the individual parts with a separate base color before moving on to any details. If you have seen a couple of my videos, I'm sure you've figured out that this is quite common practice for me. When all the base colors were painted, then I dry brushed the vest with a very light green, and this is when the texture made from the piece of fabric really starts to become visible. I gave the sleeves a quick layer of dry brushing just to pick out the raised areas. I wanted the color of the sleeves to read as white and not grey, so I made sure to paint a healthy amount of white highlights on the folds while leaving the recessed areas darker. The pants got a small amount of grey highlights, nothing crazy, just something to make the folds stick out a bit more and make it look a bit less flat. Then it was time to paint the face, and that's one of the most fun things to paint in my opinion. You can really be experimental with the color selection, because skin is made up by so many different colors. The only thing to keep in mind is that the highlights, besides becoming brighter and brighter, should also gradually be painted on smaller and smaller areas. I'm really happy about the way it turned out. Perhaps Bilbo became a bit too tan, but I mean, who knows what Bilbo is up to at the Rivendell retirement home. I wouldn't be surprised if he's just chilling on the patio, you know, getting a couple of extra hours of sunshine, more than the doctor would prescribe. Perhaps. The final thing to do before the face was complete was to glaze some dark purples around the eyes to make them pop out a bit more. The last thing to paint on Bilbo was his hair, so I dry brushed a couple of layers of light grey up to an off-white onto the entire thing. But I realized that the base layer had been painted too dark, so we had to go back and paint it a bit brighter so the contrast between light and dark wouldn't be too big. Yeah, I forgot. I have to paint his eyebrows. Then we were done painting Bilbo and it was time to paint the base. I started out by painting the entire base in a light brown. And when that layer had dried, then I dry brushed on a couple of layers of grey onto the entire thing that progressively would get lighter and lighter. And then the only thing that was left to do was to glue down Bilbo to the base. I'm gonna show you the final results in just 1 second, but before that, I just wanna say thank you so much for sticking around to the end of the video. Thank you very much. If you like this video and you want to see more of this stuff, please consider subscribing, or perhaps give this video a thumbs up if you haven't already. And I will see you again really soon. Goodbye.